Serious. What is the creepiest/scariest paranormal experience you have encountered? I did security at a children's hospital once. It was 2 a.m. when I did a patrol outside. I was approaching a playground when I suddenly heard the sound of someone knocking on metal, like a playground slide for an example. Immediately I thought it would be a homeless person or random teenagers loitering and goofing around. I walked up to the playground to investigate but no one was in sight. I dismissed it, then continued to walk, but noticed the swing was swinging. It wasn't windy, so I started to feel uneasy. But again, I couldn't hear or see anyone, even after looking around thoroughly with a flashlight. All of a sudden a blood-curdling scream occurred from behind me. I ran away. I stumbled upon a construction worker nearby who was having a smoke and asked if he heard the scream too. He confirmed that he did. I told my coworkers. We did a patrol as a group and checked all the cameras and there was nothing. One time for like 3 nights consistently I would wake up staring down the dark hallway from my bedroom and a loud robotic voice would slowly count down from 5. It was fucking terrifying. Also probably a dream. But still terrifying. When I was 13 I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I laid awake, reading a magazine. After a while I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen, into the living room and leapt over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start, a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side, the paralyzing fear was back. Forcing myself to turn my head. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. But it happened a lot. The next morning I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening. The shuffling feet. The fridge door opening. Nobody in the kitchen. Being awakened with a paralyzing fear. The shadow. The heavy breathing. The repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things. But instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." I, like 12 at the time, was sitting at my kitchen table doing homework, while my mom was on the phone sitting next to my younger brother, 5-ish, on the couch. He starts talking very matter-of-factly while giggling and looking at the ceiling, says "Yay, I'll follow you," and starts walking towards his room. Mom and I follow out of curiosity. He's standing mid-room staring in the corner ceiling, quiet except giggles. We enter the room and he says, "You were right, they followed me," and proceeds to try and rush past us to close his door. I put my arm in the way and pushed it back open. He started saying, "But the spider lady is hungry." I know it's likely just child imagination, but fuck that shit. I've had a few in the apartment I live in, but the craziest one that comes to mind happened about 6 years ago. My boyfriend and me were just chilling in bed, talking when we heard a loud and clear tapping on the window, just as if someone was knocking a door. Creepy part? We live in the 22nd and final floor of a building. Of course we freaked out, and decided to go out of the bedroom for a bit. When we opened the door, our roommate was standing on the hallway looking pale AF. I guess we looked the same. Before we could tell her what had just happened, she told us that she was coming down the hallway and saw a white shadow exit our bedroom. It got her so scared she just stood there. We live in an old house, 100 years old. When our daughter was younger, 2 to 3 years old, she started talking at night before she'd go to sleep. But it wasn't just random babbling, but rather full-on conversations. Or, rather, it was her side of answering questions in a conversation. We'd listen to her on a baby monitor answering lots of questions. She'd saying things like, "Mommy's name is X. Daddy works in a tall building. Mommy has brown hair." Things like that. It would go on for 30+ minutes. Several times we would go in there because the conversations were so detailed that we couldn't imagine that she could invent enough questions on her own to be answering them. But she'd always be alone. We'd ask her who she was taking to, and she'd look confused and say, "Nobody." That is, until one morning after a couple months of these questions going on. Wife and I are in the bathroom getting ready, and daughter comes in and asks, "Mommy, does the flying man come into your room too?" My wife turns pale and asks, "Who?" And daughter says, "The flying man." Who asks all those questions? Needless to say, wife freaked out and I thought it was weird as hell too. We have a neighbor who claims to be a medium. She said she thought we had a poltergeist, which she described as a playful, childlike spirit that is rarely harmful, unlike what the movies show. She said she could probably get rid of it for us. I didn't like the sound of that probably, especially if she said they are sometimes malevolent. In any event, it didn't really seem to scare our daughter at all, and a few weeks later the conversation stopped. I really don't know how to tell anyone of this event without sounding totally crazy, but I'm going to attempt it anyway. I was midway through my art degree and was severely sleep deprived and stressed, so maybe that factors into it, because although there were other very weird and scary things that happened in that house, I've never experienced anything this severe since. It was early morning of a big drawing assignment being due. I had rolled my massive drawing out on the floor to work on it the night before and was in the midst of carefully rolling it up and getting ready to leave when I got this feeling. I don't remember hearing anything or even that I felt dreadful feelings like being watched or anything. I don't know why I turned to look behind me, but when I did there was this black figure with no features, solid looking and in the clear daylight, moving behind me. The way it moved made my blood run cold. It was standing, torso hunched forward and knees bent, moving sideways, slowly putting one foot over the other, arms bent slightly at the elbows like it was trying to be as quiet as possible. It was like it was stalking/hunting me. It stopped moving soon after I saw it, and as I stood frozen, absolutely petrified, it just vanished. I don't know if it was paranormal, but if that's something my brain made up, that's almost just as terrifying. When I was house hunting with my ex, we inspected a house that was old but looked awesome in the listing. When I first walked in the front door, I was immediately cold from head to toe, feeling the coldness slowly move down my body. It was super weird, but I didn't think anything of it. We ended up moving into the house, and on the first day called a company that arranged for all the utilities to be connected. We'd already unpacked a lot of things and the TV was in the living room but wasn't plugged in yet. I spoke to a woman from the company and she asked for my address. When I told her, she said, "I used to live there. That house is haunted." A few seconds later the TV turned on by itself to a static noise channel. It wasn't plugged in, and we didn't have electricity connected yet. This was an old house, so there weren't any wardrobes, so all my shoes were laid out along the bedroom wall. One night I couldn't sleep and got up to get some water. When I came back to bed I noticed one of my shoes was missing. I looked around for it and finally went into one of the spare rooms, which was empty and unfurnished because the house had 4 bedrooms but we were only using 2. There in the dead center of the room, without anything around it, was my shoe. I asked my ex if he put it there and he said no, because why would he? Other times we heard tapping on windows and other random sounds that scared the shit out of us. I decided to talk to the ghost/spirit to express a peaceful coexistence with them. After that, we never heard or saw anything strange there again. I'd never believed in ghosts before that, but now I do. Was walking back to my grandmother's cottage really late one night down a back dirt road. There was only one street light at a bend in the road maybe 1,000 feet from me. No other light. The light went out when I got about 50 feet away. For a few seconds I was totally blind. And then I heard some laughter float out of the woods. A kid's giggle. Like a young kid. Just floating and echoing through the pitch black night. I was 23 and it scared me so much I couldn't even speak for a moment. No breath. I know because I tried to shout what the fuck. Immediately broke into a run but couldn't see and wiped out. Had to literally look away from where I was trying to go, using only my peripherals, to book it around the bend and onto a paved road with lights. Ran all the way home. Tourist beach town in the summer, prob just some kid laughing really loud late at night on vacation with their family. But holy shit. When I was 19, I worked in Europe for a bit. This was in the 80s, before cell phones. Went on a holiday to a remote chalet in Switzerland that a school friend had invited me to visit, and while waiting for my bus, evening, so a bit dark out, a very strange man started harassing me. He spoke French, which I didn't speak, but I got the gist. He was menacing and dangerous. A young woman my age walked up to him and scolded him in French and he left. She looked at me, and in perfect American English, said let's find your bus. She led me to a bus and I told her where I was going and she said, yeah, I assume so. She got on the bus with me, helped me with my belongings and sat with me until my stop. We spoke a bit and I asked her name, and it was the same as my name, which was really odd. She said she had lived in the community just beyond my destination since she was born. On the way, the wind blew heavily and a large branch crashed in front of us but the bus was able to move around it. The woman never seemed worried at all. She finally said, your stop is the next one. Be ready to get off. She told me how to get to the place I was going, and told me who to ask for at the door. I followed her instructions, and ended up in a delightful chalet by the Diable Rays. The next morning the owner of the chalet came to breakfast with his daughter, who I knew from school. They said how surprising it was for me to find the location at night and I mentioned the young woman who helped me. They had funny looks on their faces, they had lived there for many years, and never heard of her. They asked again what her name was, and I felt silly telling them it was the same as my name, and they seemed to kind of pity me at that point. Whoever she was, she did me a solid. Growing up, we had a small room in our basement we used as storage and for our deep freeze. Anyways, one day I was throwing some bread in it and when I closed the door, adding in we took the door knob off and put it in another door and used a door lock hasp in the top. Anyways, I latched it shut and someone or something started violently trying to open the door. But the latch was the only thing holding the door closed and I never ran so fast out of my basement.